Imagine building a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. That's what it's like trying to scale a startup with the wrong technology stack. Eventually, things will definitely start to crumble. Welcome to Managed Chaos, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. I'm Rachel Anderson.
And I'm Katrina Purcell.
And today, we're talking tech, specifically how to build a tech stack that can support your startup's growth. Katrina, have you ever watched the movie Moana?
I have not.
Really?
No, I mean, I'm not a big kids movie aficionado over here.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I feel like maybe that was an overreaction then for the fact that I am also like sans children, but apparently I am up to speed on Disney movies. Well, let me tell you about it. Because first of all, The Rock is in it, so you should watch it because it's great. And the soundtrack, 10 out of 10. It's got some real vibes. But there's this crab creature who's sort of like the bad guy at one point for like a short period of time, where he's all about like the shiny things. And so he goes after the coins and the gold and the things you can find in the ocean. And the characters have to like get one of the things in order to keep going on their adventure. That is how I feel about technology sometimes. Leaders, we don't all have to go after shiny things. It's okay. So I'm so glad that this is one of the things we're going to talk about at Southwest, because I think it's very timely with AI and applicable for every single business leader. So tell me, why is the right tech stack so critical for a startup's ability to scale?
So I feel like it's sort of like my dog at the dog park when she sees a squirrel. Ooh, squirrel. And she just drops everything she's doing.
Exactly.
So efficiency and productivity, aren't those like the famous buzzwords that we all care about, right? Mm-hmm. So making sure that you've got the right tools to automate necessary tasks, to streamline workflows. We've talked a little bit about process and how I feel technology should not drive your process. So go listen to that episode. But also improving collaboration. A lot of companies now have teams that are remote, and you have to rely on technology to make sure that your teams are talking to each other and engaging. Scalability is really key. So having the right tech stack can allow you to scale, or it can hold you back. So if your tech stack is not built in the right way to handle increased traffic, increased data volumes, user demand as your company grows, employees as your company grows, that can really limit you. So you want to make sure that you're making the right decisions. Cost effectiveness, as we all know, our runway is very important to us. So choosing the right technologies, can really save you money in the long run on infrastructure, on maintenance, on development. I'm going to really hammer this home. Don't home grow something unless you truly have to. I've seen so many startups that are like, nothing really fits what we want, so we're going to build our own thing. Well, then you have to maintain it, and then you have to upkeep it, and that's so much work. You have to create new features for it. So really thinking about that before you do it is one of my probably key takeaways. Security, so making sure that your tech stack is secure. You might think, data privacy is not a big deal. We're so small, who cares? And as you grow and scale, that can become a much larger problem, especially if you have any PII. And then customer experience. So making sure that you've got the right technology in place to enhance your user experience, drive the customer satisfaction. Customers these days are really more discerning. They're looking for a specific experience when they contact customer support. They want that support person to already know their entire life story. They don't want to have to answer questions, and so making sure that you've got technology in place that allows your team to be able to provide the best level of service.
Yeah, technology can really be like a pro or a con, depending on how you embrace it. And that can span a lot of different ways for leaders. I mean, it can either be a cost to your business because you're depending too much on technology to do things in order to avoid actually doing the hard things yourself. Or it can be a pro. You've automated something now, and your employees can spend that valuable time doing strategic work or working on the next iteration of something or putting that towards product development or customer relations. And so I really think that this is a critical part of the conversation as you grow your business of where you're going to value technology on the wider scope of getting to where you need to go. So that means then that leaders have to make choices, and choices can lead to mistakes. So what are some common mistakes that startups make when choosing or implementing their own tech stacks? And is there anything they can do to avoid mistakes?
So one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen is choosing their technology based on the current hype, the current trend, and not their actual needs. So we talked about it on a previous episode, but really understanding what your process is, understanding what your needs are before you pick the tech. Don't let the tech drive your choices for process, right? I cannot reiterate that enough. Overlooking scalability and flexibility. So thinking, well, we're this way right now, and we likely will be this way for a year. So let's just pick something. Well, ripping and replacing technology is hard. It's difficult. It's a huge change management nightmare for your teams. And so really thinking about what you're not only going to use right now, but also what you're going to use in the future and how that piece of technology can scale with your team and whether it can scale with your team. Failing to plan for your integration or, compatibility, right? So this was a long time ago, and I really hope that this particular company has gotten themselves together. But we had a piece of technology at an old client that didn't have any open APIs. It was essentially Fort Knox. Getting data in and out of that system was like impossible. They wanted you to use CSV files and uploads and downloads. And, the client really hadn't thought about it when they signed up for it because it didn't need to connect to anything else. It was a, closed system, and they kind of liked that. But as they kept building and as they kept understanding how things were interconnected, how their clients wanted to see things, they realized that they actually needed to connect it, and it was basically impossible. And so, making sure that you're thinking about how things can become compatible. Part of that means doing your upfront diligence on your data, making sure that, you kind of look at all the different fields in your different systems and that you're creating your data dictionary and your master data around the smallest common denominator, and making sure that you're making those choices up front. The other thing that I find a lot of people do or don't consider is the total cost of owning something. And so, you've got a lot of freemium these days. Spoiler alert, it's really not free. Typically the things you really need, that one feature is going to be behind a paywall. Additionally, a lot of those you pay by seat, which might not seem so bad when you're a team of 5 people. But once you've grown and your team has scaled, that becomes a pretty large cost. And some of those don't have enterprise models or, models where you can stop paying by the seat. And so I think those typically just really not considering kind of all of your options, and also using the technology as a crutch to make decisions, as opposed to really making the hard decisions and then looking for the technology that supports those.
Yeah, that's super smart. I'm going to add a couple because you made me think about them while you were chatting. One is that, I've worked for companies and with companies that have made 2 different kinds of choices about technology. One, that they want to go cheaper, so they're going to go with a developing technology for whatever purpose, right? And I think that there's value there, right? You get sometimes higher customer service and one-on-one attention because they're trying to really, develop their own brand and business. You often get it cheaper. Sometimes you can get special requests. But then there's drawbacks of now you might be restricted with some of the stuff that you might want that could be available at other price points that maybe aren't all that more expensive and a little bit farther on. And so just having that consideration as part of what you value in the technology and how you want to have your business grow and develop, right? Like, I think that should be a conscious choice that you make, especially cautioning that you don't make it for the person that has to use it, because that's difficult if you don't understand what that person who's actually using it is going to need. But then the other thing is that, when all else fails, especially as you're learning the early aughts of all the things you just talked about, I usually recommend people make RFPs, even if they never send it to the tech company themselves, because it forces you to get clear on exactly what you're asking for, what features you need, how much does it cost, and then using it like a checklist. Like, does this company have this thing? Do I pay for it? What's the total cost? How many seats? And it really helps to guide your decision when you're not sure because you haven't done it a bunch, or you're going into something that maybe needs a little bit of extra attention. So I thought your points are really good. And I think it's really highlighting how important it is to not just make willy-nilly decisions.
Yeah, think ahead, right?
Yeah. Okay. You know what? Let's just summarize all of it in that. Just think ahead. That's all. A little bit of thought. Okay, but let's say, somebody really does want to take it out to heart and they're just like, yes, I'm going to think ahead. I'm going to do it. Well, then tell us, what are the key considerations that they should keep in mind when they want to future-proof their tech infrastructure to really be something that sticks with them as they grow?
Yeah, so I think cloud computing is one of them. I worked for a company that was in the process of migrating to the cloud. I cannot even tell you how much that stifled and really held up their development, because the process of moving to the cloud was so arduous that they had no developers to actually work on new features. And so really kind of, I think this is it's 2025 at this point, right? So cloud computing, microservices, right? And so I think that's another thing where if you're starting in the last few years, you should already be doing this, but really breaking down your application into smaller, independent services. Any company that you're looking to hire for their technology should be doing that. It helps with maintenance. It also helps with just staying and being able to scale, but staying up to date. APIs and integrations, we've already talked about this. It's come on, guys. It seems great to be like, our system is closed, don't worry about it. Great, until it has to integrate with other tools and other platforms. Again, don't build something internally just because you feel like that one thing you need doesn't exist in a current product. The chances are, number one, if you want it and no one else does, why? And then number two, if you really want it and everyone else does, someone's gonna build it. Right. And so, having the internal tech debt of owning a software that you've built it's a lot of work. And especially if you're not monetizing it and it's just for your internal teams to be using. The other piece there is really trying to remain as out of box as possible. I cannot tell you the amount of complicated Salesforce implementations I've seen where it didn't need to be so complicated. And that creates a challenge, right? Because Salesforce is a pretty open ecosystem. You can integrate lots of things with it. But if you've created so many customizations that no one can deal with that, then you kind of have locked yourself in, even though, yes, you could get other things to integrate with it. Data management, we've talked about this already, but making sure that you understand what data is going where, what systems it's transferring between, and making sure that as that volume of data grows, you know where it's going, you know how you're mining it. Cybersecurity, this is we need our little buzzword, but obviously prioritizing that. I think using established technologies, as Rachel mentioned, is a really good way to ensure that there's just inherent security around the data. But making sure that your teams are trained on phishing and making sure that you're, that any software you're using has cybersecurity measures. And then emerging technologies, right? So staying aware and informed of new technologies, understanding how those new technologies might affect things that you're using. So it might affect companies that you're already using, but also how could it impact your future needs, right? So as you start to think about, using AI or Web3 or edge computing, right? Where can those maybe potentially fit in your business? And what could that look like?
Yeah, and I'm also going to throw out one singular mindset one, which is a lot of business startup leaders, executives, etc., have come from bigger companies. I'm not saying that's all, but a lot, right? And you get good at something, you get an idea, you start a company. So just be cautious that because something exists in its fullest form, it doesn't mean that's what you need right now at your size business and your stage business. And that's really where, Katrina, what you said about like future proofing, right? Like make sure that what you have can scale, but the Salesforce setups is a perfect example. Just because a full-fledged setup looks like 1, 2, 3 doesn't mean your business needs that right now. And that could be way more complicated than is actually helpful. So I thought that was really, really good advice. Listen, if you're out there listening and you're like, I definitely need to start assisting our stack and we don't really know where to get started, you should reach out to us. We have a helpful guide that we can pass on to you. We'd be happy to help and just get that into your hands so that you can really get started on getting your tech stack into a place where you can grow and scale. So that is a wrap on this episode of Manage Chaos Podcast. We thank you so much for joining us. We always love talking to everyone every week as part of how we run our businesses. And so if you want to keep talking to us and hearing all of these little tidbits, you can follow and subscribe on YouTube to help us get to our goal of 5,000 followers this year. You can also follow and subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So with that, we'll talk to you on the next episode of the Managed Chaos Podcast. Did you hear? Katrina and I are going to be at South by Southwest. We'll be hosting a workshop for startup leaders just like you. And this is just one of the 3 topics we're going to deep dive. We'll be hearing real life case studies, exploring templates and tools, having peer collaborations, and taking your questions for live consulting. We'd love to see you there. But if you can't attend, it's okay. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at the Managed Chaos Podcast to see our behind the scenes looks at South by Southwest and a special live episode recorded right in the heart of Austin. Check out our other 2 episode previews on South by Southwest to hear more about what you can expect, and we hope to see you there.